Go. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are in the world, in whatever time zone, joining us for Cultivating Voices live poetry. It's our October new book showcase. I'm your host, Sandy Yannone. I'm the author of Boats for Women in the Glass Studio from Salmon Poetry. And today we have an amazing constellation of 4 poets who will be sharing their new books for our deep listening, pleasure, contemplation, enjoyment. You put the noun in as to what this upcoming 90 minutes will mean for you in your life experience. Before we start, I just want to thank everyone who joined us last week for our Poets Focus on Possibility. It was a tremendous kaleidoscope of experiences that certainly carried me through the week, thinking about all the possibilities at hand and what that means. Well, before I talk a little bit more about today's program, I want to share a little bit more about Cultivating Voices live poetry for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, either here in Zoom and or listening on Facebook and or watching us on the recording. Cultivating Voices live poetry began in March of 2020 in response to the pandemic. And we have been providing almost weekly readings. Since that time, we are an international, intergenerational, intersectional group of poets and poetry lovers around the world. And we truly value our opportunity to bring the world to poetry and poetry to the world, as we've been doing almost every week since March of 2020. It would not be possible to do that alone. And so before I even go further, of course, I want to give my deepest gratitude to Don Krieger and Kim Ports Parsons, who are the real movers of this operation. Well, folks, I know that we continue to live in such volatile times, as every day we live inside and outside of that, in such volatile times as these, we are living inside and outside of poetry, and poetry brings that challenge to us of how we inhabit our lives and how we can change our lives, and also how we might find opportunities to cherish them, as well as the lives of those we do and do not know. It's an ever-changing kaleidoscope of experiences with shifting emotions, colored by the past and an imagining of the future, sometimes with a feeling as if it was already traveled. So where will we travel today with our 4 poets? Let's find out, and let's see how our 4 poets will be our maps. As we begin today's poetry journey, a few reminders. Our chat is live, so please do use it respectfully and with great encouragement and support for our readers. And you will also be seeing links to the book, their new books, for your purchase if you have the resources, and I hope you will, because these are incredibly, incredibly dynamic readers. I know I have connections with each of them. I'm familiar with their work. And as I said in our pre-show, I am so excited to see them in this particular combination. Well, our first reader today is Morag Anderson, and I met Morag in Galway. She had just won a very impressive prize in the Over the Edge, with the Over the Edge group in Galway, founded by Susan Miller Dumars and the late amazing, Kevin Higgins. And I have every time, Morag, I tell the same story, but it's because the story is so deeply, deeply in my heart of our first meeting. And hearing Morag read her, absolutely dynamic, her dynamic winning poem that day. And every subsequent time she's come out with a pamphlet collection, I just continue to watch her deepen into this place of her poetry being deeply enriched by how she lives in the world, but also soaring, like just continues to soar. And you will hear that in her voice, I am sure. Well, Morag Anderson's second chapbook, And I Will Make of You a Vowel Sound, won the Aryamati Poetry Pamphlet Prize and was described by T.S. Eliot Prize-winning poet Joelle Taylor as delicate and furious, a haunting act of worship, of rebellion, and story. Morag was poet in residence at Creative Brain Week 2024 in Dublin's Trinity College. She was appointed the 2023 Makar for the Federation of Writers in Scotland and is poet in residence now for the 2024 Burnham Book Festival. The Scottish Poetry Library has commissioned several pieces of her work, and she is currently working with the Canmore Suicide Prevention Trust and the National Trust for Scotland. Would you please join me in a profoundly beautiful welcome to Morag Anderson?
Oh, Sandy, I hope I don't let you down. That sounded very impressive, and it didn't really sound like me, but I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. What an absolute joy to be back in a Zoom room with you, Sandy. If we can't be in a physical space together, this is a good second. Thank you, everybody else, for joining in too. I'm so excited to hear the other three readers, and I love being I love being described as a constellation. Not sure that's ever happened before. So I am drawn to writing about social inequality, poverty, discrimination, food insecurity from a female perspective, because that's my lived experience. So I write about these subjects in the hope that those who haven't experienced them might listen, and those who have experienced them or are experiencing them may feel heard. My writing changed massively after reading one single poem, Dorian Lowe's Two Pictures of My Sister. My work became less anemic and more iron-packed. It's a poem that I return to often. It gives me the courage to write what I want to write rather than what I think people want to read. I grew up in a tenement in Glasgow, and my mum sent my sister and I to what we thought was the Yellow Cushion Club, and it turned out to be the Elocution Club. We didn't last very long. A girl like me.
No bragging.
She's throwing bricks, splintering the door of the lad who calls her pape, slag, bitch. She wears anger like blood, a constant throb beneath the surface, seeping through second-hand clothes, slack as grey bandages. She joins the Yellow Cushion Club, heard it will help her talk proper. Doesn't yet know she'll be met by laughter from the sickle-tongued teacher. I tell her to rise early, look directly at the grapefruit sun, declare it no longer bitter, elocute or execute with pencil on paper. We moved from Glasgow to a coal town in the central belt of Scotland. It was the 1980s. It was an ugly time. It was an ugly town. We lived at number 7. Mandy at number 9. Dry-mouthed from want of milk, she learns to fear her mother's breast, masters the art of watchfulness through a deadlocked pupil. Hobbled by birth's random hammer, she shift shapes unseen, a cloud moving through rooms cold enough to snap childhood bones. In class, Miss Vale swipes lice from her hairline, teaches her to wash her glass eye, sneaks a clean skirt from lost and found. Mr. Gall at number 6 gifts size 5 boots. She kicks a burst ball on concrete streets, 12 metal studs, dulled to nubs. She ferrets bottles from the bin outside William Hill's, trades them at DeLuca's van for 2 scoops in a single cone. Thursday, she closes the door to the welfare officer. Her mum grips the handle of her mug like a knuckle duster. During a time of acute poverty, my mum once stole food from the factory she worked in to feed my siblings and I. She, of course, went without. There is a direct correlation between poverty, health inequity, and early mortality. My mum died very young. The shoplifter. Flaccid light and piss reek seep in from the communal hall. It takes both cold hands to form a grip, turn the key, unlock the door. The kids, still asleep in a pleat of thin limbs under sheets and coats, and a lanced heart nailed to the wall. I take the pack of sausages from the waistband of my skirt, bend carefully to pick apart damp knots in oversized boots, but still dislodge the bloodied wad of my makeshift sanitary pad. I slide down the wall, pull my knees to the ladder of my ribs, and bleed. My parents are from the Outer Hebrides, a string of Atlantic islands on the western edge of Scotland. Historically, families were large because infant mortality was high. Death was regarded as very much a part of life. Portraits of my father with a saw. The new baby, powder blue. Curtains pulled, hearth doused. The house cold till the box is cut and a small grave dug. Milk insists through cotton. Mother scrapes the grate with a buckled spoon, smears steadfast pain with a blackened goose wing, a plume of ash with each dry sob. All the lockjaw night, Dad saws sorrow into short planks, hands raw from sanding. 12 nails seal the lid, another buried in his boot lest he should find comfort. Loss, a thorn that cannot be drawn by clenched teeth or the heat of a daughter's need. I was commissioned by the Scottish Poetry Library to write poems in response to the life and work of Robert Burns, Scotland's bard, national poet, if you will. I spent a long time researching his poetry and his life. And if you go beyond the popular poems, much of his work references violence towards women. I couldn't ignore that. But tonight, I shall read a love poem I wrote for his long-suffering wife, Jean Armour. She must have loved him. Hunger for a fruited thorn. As though thumbing plump fruit for ripeness, you palm me this way and that. Words unlace restraint. I walk the tightrope of lust, taste the pale froth of short-lived bliss. Our trysting hour quickened by morning's first blush, I urge young heat upon you. My cheeks flush outbids the sun as I steal a path home through birdsong. Night after night, you rub against rock, shed old skin for the pink of new. Deceit falls from your lips like seeds from a blackbird's beak. And still, I want you. I was a week overdue with my firstborn on 9/11/2001 and had started labour pains when the news of the Twin Towers came on the TV. The labour pains stopped and it took another week for my firstborn to be coaxed out. No ordinary Tuesday, 2001. Though I am late for an intimate sweep, I cannot turn my back on the woman pressing the hem of her dress between gripped knees. She steps off the window ledge. I lift my keys and leave. A traffic warden slips a ticket beneath my wiper blade, tells me my time is up. I weigh the gravity of his words, tear the folded paper into yellow petals, throw them to the air. They rise, bloom, settle. My September belly swollen with unborn child, while we are all free falling, she begins her first descent. I'm going to finish with two love poems of sorts. The first one for my daughter, Jessie. With each pregnancy, whether it results in a live birth or not, science tells us that fetal cells remain in the mother's liver, blood marrow, blood and bone marrow. And they're thought to migrate even decades later to sites of injury. When I was in Dublin at the Creative Brain Week, I read this coming poem, and a fellow participant emailed me to say that the biggest sorrow in her life had been the miscarriage of 3 babies. And she said that the poem was an unexpected gift because she now knows that her 3 babies are still with her in some way. This, for me, is not only why we write poems, but why we share them. Migration. Long after my shelter body shucks her reluctant skull from my shell, her fetal cells, rose foamed in my core, migrate to mend my flenced heart. Drawn to salt tides and moon-dipped pools, she bends east with scatter light, forgets to look west where night falls last. Distance turns everything blue. I peel a pearldom of song from my mother tongue, seal it in bottle glass, send it on the carrying stream. She grasps freedom, swims her own rhythm. I name the space between us, broken water. Claim it, beautiful daughter. The final poem is a love poem for my sister, Catherine, who lives on this tiny Atlantic island of Barra, where the wind whistles constantly through keyholes, around window frames, under doors, down chimneys. It is said to be our ancestors singing to us, and it's where the title of my new chapbook comes from. Last Boat Home, with an epigraph by the Scottish poet W.S. Graham. Bear these words in mind as they bear me soundly beyond my reach. Though I fade like sailors' footprints, Do not moulder under grief's woolen blanket. When the ocean knocks at your wind-scraped door, rise to greet me, the first Atlantic bite. When Simmer Dim's lamp is trimmed bright and clear, find me trailing west, the last knuckle of light. When words freight your untilled tongue, sit by a rogue of stones at Scurrival and sing. In the bittersweet lull between 2 days, open your mouth to salted air, and I will make of you a vowel sound. Thank you.
Oh, so beautiful, Morag. Oh my gosh, I'm just really, I'm swept away. I'm in that boat. I'm in that boat. I'm in that boat. What I really, really felt as I was listening to you read is that we were absolutely in what I've started to call the lyrical now. The poems just anchored us with whatever subject matter to the place that we are right now, whether we are traveling to the past or even into the future. It's all one of the same swirl of time. And I just want to thank you for that opening experience. And because I know that we will be traveling in the lyrical now with each of our poets today in unique ways, and that's what makes this so beautiful. But I want to thank you for, opening the door for today. And until the next time we are in person, my dear sister, thank you, just from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you.
Well, I always have the esteemed pleasure of introducing just extraordinary human beings that have the greatest capacities to move us. And I am excited to introduce our next poet, Isabela Basombrio Hoban, whom I've had the pleasure to read with on my 60th birthday at Salmon Poetry in Ennistimon in County Clare. And those of you who've been traveling with me on this Cultivating Voices journey, you know how special it is when I get to read with anyone. And there's always a little extra shine when it's one of my Salmon siblings. So we are in for another experience of the lyrical now. And for those of you who are, doing readings and thinking about your own presentation for your readings, these four women are not only sharing basically a master crafting in writing poetry, you're hearing master classes in how to read poetry. And that is what we're about to experience with Isabela Basombrio Hoban. Well, Isabela is an award-winning poet, originally from Peru and now living in Ireland. She is a bilingual poet writing in both Spanish and English. Her recent books are Nothing Belongs to Everyone, Rain, Love, Death, Poets, and Another Type of Abbreviation. Her publishing houses are Ediciones, Vitruvio in Spain, and Salmon Poetry in Ireland. Isabela is the recipient of the 2023 Nuevo Ateneo Online Award, and Isabela was a fellow with the Next Generation Leadership Project of the Rockefeller Foundation and has received awards for her poetry from the Mayo County Council Arts Section and Culture Island. Would you please join me in a very, very warm welcome to Isabela Basombrio Hoban for her debut reading on Cultivating Voices Live Poetry.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thanks to everybody here. It was a real pleasure and honor to be able to celebrate you, Sandy. You're always celebrating everybody else. So it was a great honor. And I want to also especially thank Kim and Dawn for their amazing service to poetry, as well as for their own poetry. And my publishers, who are also poets, Pablo Mendez Jaque and Jesse Lendini. I have the privilege of having really excellent poets as publishers, which is a very wonderful, wonderful thing. And also Morag, January, and Susan, I feel that we're connected in this constellation forever now. So thank you, Sandy, for bringing us together. So my new book is called Another Type of Abbreviation. And this book explores abbreviation as a poetic metaphor of time and space and of the opacity of words. Currently, society wants everything quick. All these time-saving abbreviations in language or in devices are supposed to save time, but time seems to have sped up. ASAP. The more we try to save time, the less time there seems to be. Also, shortened names, for example, Joe for Josephine, can create a parallel person, a private person versus a public person, a private language versus a public language. An abbreviation is also a form of economy. And in this book, I have several one-line abbreviated poems. And I am going to start with one of them called Dedicate. I am going to dedicate this poem to you, for you to worry. I'm also going to follow that with another one-liner called Abbreviation. How do you abbreviate distance covered? I also wrote a poem exploring the possibility of a fingerprint as an abbreviation for the person. Often when we're going through security, that's kind of how we're abbreviated. So abbreviations are also supposed to make communication easier, but in their attempt at quickness, at saving time, they sometimes fail. And this is a failure of communication. The poem is called Message. On the crest of a wave, and only for a second, my fingerprint appears before crashing onto the rocks of some shore. It didn't work. The message was not recognized. I should have sent it in a bottle instead of hoping that someone knows how to read underneath the undergrowth of sea air while living on an island. The following poem looks at abbreviation in the dynamic of meeting, and that can be person to person, or it can be in a broader context of what it means to meet. It's called Meeting Places. Poets meet on the page. Light, there, but not there. Friends, through digestion. Nature at a card game with a supernatural. Eternity as soon as possible. The self wandering. Fairies at the crossroads. Doubts around the corner. Music in the echo of the mountains. Ruins in the echo. Peace somewhere else. Sundown, acclimatizing slowly. Red flags on a wake-up call. Parasitic plants breathing in the forest of unwanted guests. Colleagues with only one thing in common. Life with everything in common. Meeting you, anything but common. Night, pondering on the pier, mourning in the memory of a face no one remembers. Birth at death's drive-through window. Meeting meets where knowing ends. Meeting ends where we begin. This next poem addresses the aspect of writing as a bilingual writer. I'm always having to deal with people saying, are your poems translated? And of course, translation and bilingual writing are two completely different things. So this is my poem trying to express the process of writing bilingually. It's called Bilingual, and I'm going to read it in English and then in Spanish. Bilingual. Poems in two languages are like watercolors that dissolve in water, humidity on humidity, admitting that bilingualism is a place and everything has its place except a place. Translation is a simultaneous monologue and soliloquy of the weirdness of rain and sometimes the winter of an opera with a usual love, deception, mistaken identity, villains, a daring rescue. Bilingüe. Poemas en dos idiomas son como acuarelas que se disuelven en agua, humedad sobre humedad, admitiendo que el bilingüismo es un lugar y todo tiene su lugar excepto un lugar. Traducir es un simultáneo monólogo y soliloquio de la rareza de la lluvia y a veces el invierno de una ópera con el amor habitual, el engaño, la identidad equivocada, pillamos un osado rescate. Next poem is also an abbreviated poem about crying as an abbreviation for this deep emotion. Crying. Me, the moon in the luster of pearls. Them, what do we do with the one who is crying? The sea, a hungry sun. I live in a town in the west of Ireland called Castlebar, and I pretty much live in the library there. And one day I borrow books a lot also from that library. And I always feel when I borrow a book that somehow there's a trace in the book from all the people that have previously borrowed the book. And sometimes there's an actual physical trace. And this poem addresses that. And this poem is also about a woman reader of a woman writer. The library in Castlebar, 5,000 years ago, or maybe last year, she wrote a book that some people borrow from the library in Castlebar. The book is returned with an unspoken history that deepens with each lend. A new tea stain, an old tear stain, both made worse by the reader's vigorous drying attempts. A mysterious numerical sum scribbled on the margin, a receipt for Main Street parking, and the inevitable underlined verses, an authority imposed by the previous reader. When I borrowed the book and opened it like a creaking door, I found a pressed flower, a note, and a photograph. The photograph fell to the floor. The pressed flower disintegrated, leaving a morbid shadow. And the note stuck to page 48. Everything was faded. Page 48 started with the words. It's strange how a place of so many words is so silent. The note said, forgive me for not having been able to find the words. Page 48 again, underlined twice. We are breathing in the same page. She was 80 years old when the photograph was taken, dreaming, books, spilling tea, losing parking tickets, finding words. The poem, or rather the book, thank you very much. The book has a section, within the book, there's a section of several poems called Voids. And that section explores abbreviation in relationship to the concept of space. And I wrote this particular short poem after having seen a wren, a little bird, hard at work, building a nest in our garden shed. Male wren birds, they build 5 or 6 different nests, and the females inspect each in turn to determine which, if any, she wishes to use. This was an unused nest. After weeks of collecting twigs and mosses, a triangular-shaped wren abandons the nest that it built. An epicenter of architectural work transforms into a ruin overnight. Melodious bird song replaced with a once-in-a-while choral society of spiders and voids. And I'm just going to finish with one of my one-line poems and one last short poem. And thank you very much for listening and for your presence. I can feel it. Abbreviation 3. Aging is the abbreviation of life. And I'm going to continue with my final poem, which also continues with a theme of aging, and it's called Fluctuations. Light, lighter than light, from a high power source, foretells never-ending unknowns through lucid dreams of faceted sapphires speaking in earth tones. Deep sleep mode interprets the original language with unexpected spellings. Midpoint. When stars are only visible on clear nights, I feel like an autumn as old as leaves.
Muchas gracias, Isabela.
Gracias a ti.
So many things, so many places we just traveled, in the textual, in the intertextual, and, you know, in the extremes and the crevices and in the beauties of language and languages. I'm so struck by that concept or that what you elevated in that poem about meeting, where, you know, meeting anyone is anything but common. And when we come together to hear poetry, we are just like in that most exquisite possibility of meeting people in different ways than we are accustomed to, in really any other context. I mean, music is a meeting, you know, there are different ways to meet, but I love that idea of amplifying that meeting is anything but common. And so that I believe that is a step toward peace, is understanding that meeting anyone is anything but common. And if you can hold that in a sacred space, there's some chances there. And then the other thing is that feeling like now in my life that every poem is a daring rescue from something. Every single poem is a daring rescue. So just exquisite. Thank you so much. I cannot wait till we can get together in person, hopefully next year, sit and have some strong Irish tea together and really talk even more about this concept of abbreviations, which I felt were quite expansive. So thank you. Folks, I tried to explain to everyone that we were just really in for the lyrical now today. And we're just moving along. We're only halfway through and I'm already kind of like elevating, like I'm kind of levitating, which is hard for me. Well, our next reader is January Gill O'Neill. And I first met January through one of her poems. And I believe it was in Poetry Northwest. I read a poem. I could be wrong, but that's neither here nor there. The meeting was profound. And then I had the beautiful opportunity to get to be in the mastery of what she shares about poems when she was part of a workshop in Poets on the Coast, which is the absolute brainchild of and creative, the creative output of Susan Rich and with her then poetry partner for Poets on the Coast, Kelly Russell Aganon. I like to acknowledge both of you. And January was the workshop leader, and therefore most of that weekend to kind of support our further learning about poetry. And I have always harbored a beautiful hope that she would be able to come to the program someday. And it's today, which is fabulous. I'm so excited. Her latest collection is Glitter Road. And now this is how cool January is. Swag. Everybody figure out what your swag is for your books if you have a book. If you don't have a book yet, figure out what your swag will be when you have a book, if that's your aspiration. January has the coolest swag for her book. It's like a soy candle with and I burn it to really help me clarify my space. And I was so grateful for that gift that day, because there was the day that I really needed a candle. Your Glitter Road candle was my go-to candle. And your poems are often my go-to poems. There's a lot of go-to poems, everybody. You all understand that. So no one is offended if you're not my only go-to person. Well, January Gill O'Neill is an associate professor at Salem State University and the author of Glitter Road 2024, Rewilding 2018, Misery Islands 2014, and Underlife 2009. I'm just going to say right there, if you're looking for titles, here's a person who has some smashing titles for books, intoxicating titles. I would pick up those books just from the titles alone. All published by CavanKerry Press. From 2019 to 2020, she served as the John and Renee Risham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi, Oxford, and she currently lives in Beverly, Massachusetts. Would you please welcome, very warmly, January Gill O'Neill.
Oh, thank you, Sandy. You're the best. You really are. It's so funny. I've got boxes of candles, if I'm being honest. We might have to do some end of the year giveaways for those, but thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. So great to read with all of these esteemed authors, and thank you to Kim and Don and to everybody else who with Sandy puts all this together. It's a labor of love. I get that. So I'm going to read from Glitter Road, which came out this year, and I often hold it up. I don't know if you can see, but there's a shimmer on the front cover. It's a little bit of gold foil on the cover, and I'm really proud of it. So as Sandy mentioned, as part of my bio, I spent some time in Mississippi. I brought my two kids, they were teenagers at the time, from Beverly, Massachusetts to Oxford, Mississippi, to teach and write and get out of my comfort zone for an academic year. And so Before we went down, there were a few things that happened. The biggest was that there was a picture that went viral of 3 Ole Miss students, University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss. 3 Ole Miss students were standing next to a shot up marker for Emmett Till, for where his body was pulled out of the Tallahatchie River. So Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who was beaten, shot, brutalized, thrown into the Tallahatchie River. His body floated upstream. And the place, where they set the marker, that sign, the 3 Ole Miss boys were standing there with rifles and bullet holes all throughout, and that picture went viral. And so given that we were headed to Mississippi and Mississippi's past, I was concerned, about a whole host of things. I'm glad to say that, the people down there are warm and, just like everywhere else, they want change. To many of them, it's just, they have a history that they have to contend with and own up to. And I was grateful for the experience. So much of the poems in Glitter Road revolve around my time in Mississippi. So in October of 2019, we went to the rededication ceremony when they put a new marker in place. At the rededication of the Emmett Till Memorial, Glendora, Mississippi, October 19th, 2019. He was 14, same age as my daughter who sits beside me on the crowded bus. We travel with police escort like a funeral procession to dedicate the new marker at Graball Landing. Along the dirt road, red spider lilies around the gnarled roots of aged oaks. Life grows on among the silent brown branches. Delta dust settles to reveal cotton fields ready for harvest. There have been signs before. 3, stolen, shot up, tossed in the river. The last one stood just 35 days, riddled with bullets again and again, refusing us the comfort of leaving the past in the past. Till's story requires hardened steel. This marker weighs 500 pounds. It is black, bulletproof, designed to absorb rifle rounds of white supremacy. And my heart curves around the side of this road, reconciling that old hurt with an old resolve. Every time it's taken down, it's going back up. On the Tallahatchie's bank, we honor, we grieve. Let our feet sink into the mud while the brown water rages. So the place where Emmett Till allegedly whistled at a white woman was in Money, Mississippi, at a place called Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. And to go to it now, it is a complete, shambles. I mean, it is in complete disrepair. No one has bothered to save it or preserve it or knock it down. And so that says so much about what we remember, whose history gets remembered, what happens when we let it go. So I always say, if we don't tell our stories, those stories disappear. So this was one of the places that I went to and visited. Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market, Money, Mississippi, 2019. You could drive past and miss this place. Ghost empty, roofless, its half walls tentacled by green vines, foundation fenced in by orange safety netting, untouched for decades. And I think to myself, this is the place. This is where Emmett Till whistled at, flirted with, touched a white woman, allegedly. If these half walls could talk, what half truths would they tell? The family of a juror from Till's murder trial owns this ruin, unwilling to sell or restore the time-worn remains. the red letters of a private property sign, barely visible. Now weeds grow where the porch used to be. Shimmer of sunlight turns the window into a mirror. What's left crumbles under the weight of neglect, the Delta's way of forgetting its living history. I stand at a threshold I can never cross. What's left stays with me unearthed. And so thank you. So since we have such an international audience, I'm just going to read one that's not in the book. And of course, I have just lost it. So let me go back to it. This one was published in Poetry Ireland. So maybe a few of you saw it. Flowers for Black Boys. The season's first daffodil hangs its big yellow head low beside the garage, the one place this once bulb is passed over by the squirrels. In the news, a 16-year-old Black boy was shot after knocking on the wrong door. A boy not much older than my son away at college. The tall green stalk of him I love with all my heart. Overcast morning, April falling back toward chill. Tiny mirrors of frost glaze the young bright grass. When I think about this lone flower, this unassuming bloom, standing in the hard spring soil, reaching for the light, I forget to take a breath. And so we were down in Mississippi from August of 2019 until May of 2020. And in March of 2020, COVID hit. So, we were in isolation just like everyone else. One of the things we wanted to do but didn't get a chance to do was to take a canoe ride down the Mississippi River. So of course we didn't do the whole Mississippi, but we were able to go back in 2021 to Clarksdale and spend the day on a section of the Mississippi River. The river remembers. Here the water is silt brown, stretches mile wide, flat as a washed out conveyor belt, an unhemmed rumble strip. I can't read the river, can't see my hand when it plunges elbow deep to feel the cool against the Mississippi heat, hot as a dog's mouth. We canoe here for hours, through swirling eddies, watch the trash barges and towboats travel downstream. The river glistens hard as broken glass. Here, everything is fluid. In lower Mississippi, the south-south, where the two-lane blacktop cuts through an infinity of flat, cotton, soybean, corn, farm, tumble-down shack. Creeks and rivers bifurcate the land like blood veins. Here, the GPS gives up. New islands form at the current's whim, and what is untouched grows lush and verdant. Willow and privet border the collapsing coastline. A carp leaps into the boat when it hears us coming. We stop here in an oxbow. Gumbo mud sticks to our feet. River rock, plastic, fossils, gar. Raccoon and coyote leave tracks in rust-colored sand. The slaves, sold down the river, hid here, waited for their chance to escape up north, hid in caves, fled to the Twin Cities and Canada, their fate at the mercy of the river's next rise. Here's the nadir of our suffering, which started in one place to end in another. Here's where flow and marvel and history converge, this harm joy, this beautiful sadness. So, Sandy, I was trying to quickly remember which poem was in Poetry Northwest. So I think this is it. So I'll go ahead and read it. My time in Mississippi was not all research and sadness. There was a lot of joy in Mississippi, and I fell in love there. Mississippi season. He says I hold my mind well, likes that I put my kids first and have never tried drugs. The lilt in his southern drawl intoxicates me. He likes not being able to have all of me, makes him want me more. Broken finds broken, I say, so when he kisses my neck, along my clavicle, down to my breast, I break all over again, after a drought of no kissing, no touch. How not being chosen can dim any light. For years, I told myself a story I could live with, thought of myself a kind of carnival fish in a plastic bag, floating in my own still water, wanting to be loved. Dumb luck that someone flips a red ring on the mouth of a glass jar, and just like that, I am kissing again, kissing a man so luminous, so beautifully flawed, I can barely look at him. And my mind, done with all its stories, turns to the carnal as I rim the hinge of his lips with my tongue and dive into this quenching. Thank you. I'm not sure how much time I have, so I'm just going to read 3 more if that's okay. And if I need to cut it short, just wave your hands furiously. Okay. The Great Hello. A big-ass moon rises full and wide in the western sky. The deep pond awakens with the tongues of bullfrogs. I'm barely over the threshold before our mouths lock and we slither onto the bed. We watch each other watching each other with a silent urging, a kindness for the other in the pursuit of pleasure. I fling my head back as he grabs my hips, pulls me close, begin to feel myself levitate, hovering above the bed as the shadow of someone I don't recognize but have known all her life. I am an over-easy egg trying not to break her yolk, but I do. The joy of leaving the body tender and shimmering. A moment of gratitude for every daunting thing that brought me to this place where I am my most fearless, my most true. I wick the sweat from his head, slide my hand across his glistening skin before crawling back into myself, sprawled across the sheets, streaked in moonlight. So a lot of this book, the way it is shaped is due in great part to Susan Rich and to Cindy Veach, who's also on. And when Cindy and I do a lot of writing together, and with our friend Jen Martelli, and we were doing a poem a day challenge, and we all happened upon the same story. So sometimes you pull poems from wherever you can get them. So we were looking at news stories, and we all found the same one about a woman being swallowed by a snake in Thailand. And so on this day, we all wrote the same poem, or about the same topic. This is my version of it. Woman swallowed by a python in her cornfield. Inside every woman is a snake. Some think I'm a hoax or an oddity, rarer than winning Powerball or being struck by lightning. Everything has a form, even doubt. Think of me as someone you've met in a dream. Green stalks shade the sun, keep me hidden from the villagers, the non-believers. To find me, you must enter me. Oh, that your body fits into my body makes us unholy. Let me press my mouth to your scar, run my tongue along your flesh so I can taste how you wound. The wild boars patrolling the edges won't save you. Footprints, flashlight, machete, slippers, all that I've left behind. Inside every snake is a woman. That's the part of me I love the most. Reticulated constrictor, word made flesh, time unfolding, lore or legend, I am done telling the kinder story. I am a myth of my own making. Part my snake flesh, and you will find me intact, clothed as I was when I visited the corn. Think of me as the gift you're unsure how to open. And one more, I will just close with this one. It's the title poem of the book, Glitter Road. Thank you so much, everyone. Glitter Road. I'll take my miracles however they appear these days. A salamander poking its head above the bricks, the shocking blue overcoat of the season's first bluebird, a spider web unbroken. At the corner of Molly Bar and McElroy, I saw a thick trail of glitter in the curve of the right turn lane. Fuchsia, heavy shimmer refracting the noonday sun as if layering flat a rainbow's extracted hue. Not paint or blood or a parade shedding its cheer. It's the faded streak of eyeshadow as it trails into flecks then disappears. I think of cars passing through this moment, their undercarriages aglow with possibility. Hard not to feel good riding a glistening wave, my tires now bespeckled with a purple sheen that's tough to rid or wash away, the road ahead made beautiful by this temporary shine. Thank you.
There is no temporary shine about your poems. It is shine, shine, shine all the way, all the way. And I just want to say gratitude for every daring poem.
I'm going to send you another candle, Sandy. Thank you.
I'll take it. I'll take it. The book is Glitter Road, my friends. I didn't share at the top of the hour with everyone, but I'm actually joining you all from Washington, D.C. And the reason I am bringing this up in particular at this particular moment is just, I like it when I can give a little bit of a history lesson or shine some light on some things. So here I am sitting in a place where there is the National Museum of American History, African American history, which I have been to and which I hope I go to again. And the first time I went because I knew that Emmett Till's coffin is in the museum. I've read a lot about Emmett Till. I just feel like Emmett Till walks with a lot of people differently. But I feel that he walks with me. And I felt it for a long time. I've read a lot. I read a lot about him. And so for me to be in DC knowing what I knew and for you to open with those poems provided a very intimate experience for me right from the get-go. But of course, you moved from that shattering history to exquisite ecstasy by the end of the reading. I mean, your reading was a crescendo, an incredible, incredible crescendo. And I'm just grateful that you are a writer in this world, sharing your work. I mean, what else am I going to say, Judy? That's my host here, right? That's the truth. I got to say it. Got to say it when you got to say it. So keep lighting the candles. Hopefully we'll meet up soon in Massachusetts. Folks, again, I've been sharing with you that every single one of these poets today is bringing something so utterly exquisite and necessary. I get a little choked up thinking that I'm about to introduce Susan Rich because I have known Susan Rich now for a few decades. And she has helped me walk my journey in poetry. And I'm super grateful for that. And all the more reason that I am profoundly grateful to be able to hold space for the journey of her new book that we're about to hear from. I have publicly talked about how I think this is a book of incredible, incredible consequence and necessity. And at this particular time, but when a book is of a particular time and so needed in a particular time, that means it's going to transcend time as well. And that's what I know the future of this book is, but all we have is the now. And in the now, that's what Blue Atlas is doing for me and folks that I know who have had the pleasure, the profound pleasure to have to contemplate the depth of the narrative that is simmering and shimmering in Blue Atlas. So without further ado, let me take a breath and read Susan Rich's bio. Susan Rich is the author of 6 collections of poetry. Her most recent books include Blue Atlas from Red Hen Press and Gallery of Postcards and Maps, New and Selected Poems from Salmon Poetry. Susan, along with Kelly Russell Agadan, co-edited Demystifying the Manuscript, Creating a Book of Poems from To Sylvia's Press, and along with Brian Turner, co-edited Strangest of Theaters, Poets Crossing Borders from McSweeney's. Her previous poetry book, The Cartographer's Tongue, Poems of the World, won the PEN USA Award, and Susan's work appears in Plowshares, Poetry Northwest, Morag, and many, many other journals. You can open up any journal in not only in the United States, but around the world, and you might have the good graces of seeing one of her poems. Her next book, Bird Brains, A Lyrical Guide to Washington State Birds, is forthcoming from Raven Chronicles Press. She makes her home in Seattle, Washington, on the edge of an inland sea. Hello, Susan, and I love you.
Wow, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Yes, yes. What a pleasure, and also somewhat humbling to follow these 3 amazing poets. I've really, really enjoyed listening to each of you. I just wish we were in person so that we could all go out for a drink afterwards and get to know each other. So I am going to take us home. And I'm going to start with some older work before we get to Blue Atlas, but we will get there. And the first poem I'm going to read isn't in a book yet, so maybe that means it's going to be in the next book. I was in Gaza in 1996. I think it was January, if I'm right, January of 1996, when it was a very hopeful time. The Oslo Peace Accords had just been signed. And for the first time, Palestinians could be in charge of their own education system. They, until that point, had had the same, curriculum as Israel, which, well, I'll just read you the poem I wrote after coming back. And what's interesting is I wrote a fair bit after coming back from Gaza, not right away. And then I didn't know quite what to do with it. I don't think readers knew quite what to do with it. This poem was published in Lebanon. Checkpoint, Gaza City, Gaza. I arrive via global optimism in the aftermath of Oslo into a room of bright teachers. Small desks I arrange in an open circle. Here is the first classroom in Gaza for human rights education, for Palestinians who've known only its absence. There are concerns and then much excitement over the abolishment of room decorum. Together, we built an open space. No more first or last students, finally an equal footing. On our last day together, the men ask for my passport. They look odd with long-barreled rifles, snug against their chests, serious high-tech weapons of water, green-toned guns borrowed from Bashir's daughters. Our play is called Checkpoint, they tell me. Every day we live this way. Sometimes I tell about the poem afterwards. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I kind of I want you to experience it with more of an empty, a blank page, when maybe I could have told you that I was teaching human rights education to teachers, and we did these theatrical pieces at the end. So that description of the men asking for my passport, they reenacted what it was like to go through an Israeli checkpoint, because so many Palestinians worked in Israel where there were more jobs. And I would get through that checkpoint, as I had going into Gaza, in about 10 minutes, and they might wait 2 to 3 hours each morning on their way to work. So note on that. Okay. We may go back to unpublished work at the end. I hope I do my timing right. I also want to show, if I hold it just like that, you're at least getting part of it. My book From Salmon Poetry, Gallery of Postcards and Maps, New and Selected Poems, with an introduction by Ilya Kaminsky. And many thanks to Sandy for guiding this book through. And if we had time, if we were going out to the pub afterwards, I would tell you the crazy story of Sandy getting me to put this together, and then my texts from Sandy saying, the book has landed, the book is in my carry-on, may I look at the book, bringing it to Jessie at Salmon Poetry many years ago, right before the pandemic. So thank you for that. Again, longer story, but a very fun story, because I felt like we were in the middle of a spy movie, which I've always wanted to be in the middle of. I think Morag had a poem on 9/11, and I remember it took me years to write, and I was afraid that no one would want to hear about 9/11. And my friend, the poet Elizabeth Austin, said, 9/11 is going to be like World War II. It's not like we're going to forget about it or it's going to be over. Mohammed at the mosque, for my student upon his graduation. And sometime later, in the lingering blaze of summer, in the first days of September, you phone. If I don't tell anyone my name, I'll pass for African American. And suddenly, this seemed a sensible solution, the best protection to be a Black man born in America, more invisible than Somali, Muslim, asylum seeker. Others stayed away that first Friday, but your uncle insisted that you pray. How fortunes change so swiftly, I hear you say. And as you parallel park across from the Tukwila Mosque, a young woman cries out, her fears unfurling beside your battered car. Go back where you came from. You stand, both of you, dazzling there in the midday light, her pavement facing off against your parking strip. You tell me she is only trying to protect her lawn, her trees, her untended heart, already alarmed by its directive. And when the neighborhood policeman appears, asks you, asks her, asks all the others, so what seems to be the problem? he actually expects an answer, as if any of us could name it, and as if perhaps your prayers chanted as this cop stands guard, watching over your windshield during the entire service, might hold back the world we did not want to know. So sometime after 2011, I wrote that poem, and I just a month or so ago went to Muhammad's wedding. So Muhammad is still very much with me, although not in Seattle. I wish he was closer. I did a lot of traveling. Sometimes my students and we interview each other, and it sounds like I've had the most boring life because I've been at Highline College for 25 years. And then I mention I lived in South Africa and the Republic of Niger, West Africa, and worked in Bosnia and Gaza, and they look at me a little differently. So this poem is called Change, written either while or right after I was living in South Africa in the time Nelson Mandela was president. Boy, that makes me sound ancient, but it was very exciting. Nelson Mandela, the first Black man to be president in South Africa, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was trying to kind of unearth the history of what had happened to Black people, people of color in that country. I don't know if you need that for this poem, but I do think so, because let me just say one more thing. Now I'm getting into storytelling mode. I didn't have a car for the first 6 months I was in South Africa, which was very unusual for a quote unquote white woman to be walking the streets. And so I saw everybody else that was on the street, and they had different stories than I did. Change. He doesn't register me as anything more or less unique than the flawed light the street lamp feeds to the hibiscus tree that watches the corner cafe on this empty street. We collect here most evenings late, as if arranged, as if we might share a scrap of language and appear legitimate as lovers for any passerby to see. One body leaning toward another, fingertips meeting, the figures blurred, an onlooker might say, an odd pairing. How much easier it is to acquiesce to the alchemist nation, a new constitution, a policy, findings of truth and reconciliation. But this man right here, untethered from the ordinary, still insists on his interior gaze, his fraying cord of grace, the man who nests underneath the cafe eaves, tonight looks up and almost nods to me, not the stranger from another country, as he murmurs to himself an indecipherable blessing. I touch his palms, pour my change into his two cupped and gorgeous hands. Again, I don't know if it would be helpful or not to have understood that he was living on the street in my neighborhood, but I like to just have that we met every night on my way back from work. Okay, am I changing books? I think I'm going to change books and go to the book that Sandy was mentioning, Blue Atlas, which you can kind of see that way. And again, if we were at the pub, I would tell you the story of the cover and the artist that I met from India who showed up at my house just as my book was coming out, but that will stay for another day. Okay, so you can see that a lot of the poems that I had been writing are about places that I lived and people that I met. But Blue Atlas is about a story that I hope goes beyond my life, but starts with a coerced midterm abortion that I had when I was in my 20s. after falling in love with a French volunteer who then changed his mind. So I think that's enough background, but I think that might be helpful. And I'm leaping over some of this. I love words. I'm sure everybody in this room has their own love affair with words. And I'll start with a poem that's called Arborist/Abortionist. I don't think etymologically the words have a connection, but they certainly sound like it to me. And so I started wondering about how they connected. Arborist/Abortionist. Procured by anxious relatives who demanded a disappearing trick, prepaid like a surcharge for yard work done in the off-season. His steel tool severing a quirk of a tree limb attached to the nub of a stubborn bud. He didn't question how I appeared transplanted into his waiting room, never inquired as to the co-author of my infinitesimal text, although he memorized its map, extracted the troublesome little branch that obscured the golden overlook and restored the river view. This book probably took me about 10 years to write, and I didn't know if it would ever really be a book. And right now I'm working on a book that is kind of looking at, I started out saying it was about weird Judaism, and now I realize in this particular moment, it's also going to be about my time working in Gaza. And probably a good moment to say that I am Jewish and was brought up in a conservative Jewish family. This poem is called Pregnant with the Dead. I am a woman swollen with the history of my dead. Great aunts and second cousins murdered in the old country, bloated with fragments of survivors who hid months in garbage cans, others in partisan forests. On their bandaged daughters gauzed from toe to forehead to keep safe from search patrols from their first rapes. Yes, I am a body awash in the stories of noodlekugel, borscht. Watch the heavy arms of the women waving like sails as they knead challah each Friday evening. Can't conceive of an afternoon free. What can I do with the women who occupy my vertebrae, take over my hips and tongue? They say coconut bars, Mundelbread, Hamantaschen. They say that's your problem as they stride into my kitchen, toss out the non-fat yogurt, the tofu treats. It's a rumba of before and after. And of course, many folk murdered, abducted our girls, butchered our boys. And now they tell me it's time to enjoy a brioche, a week in the Disneyland. Don't my dead deserve to mist their skin with Shalimar at the airport perfume cathedrals? Enough time spent on nightmares. Instead, let us hike up the heat, make selfies, and later, when it quiets on the hotel balcony, we vanish like light vessels, almost escaped out to sea. One last poem. Thank you for listening. And it's true what Isabela said, you can kind of feel the quality of listening even through the Zoom room. I'm going to read this last poem for Sandy because she helped me with the final line of it. It's an unpublished poem. I'm not even sure I'm supposed to read it to you. It will be in an anthology that comes out in December, inspired by Taylor Swift. That's all I'll say. The title is Plural as the Universe, which is actually kind of a line by Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese poet. Pessoa means person. He wrote under 75 different heteronyms. If you don't know his work, look him up. He is fun. And this is called Plural as the Universe. What if I were born a bird? Who would I be? A curator of cloudscapes, of guitar arias, a painted snipe, a swift, a black-capped chickadee? What if I traveled as a bird, calls over the wild hydrangea, calls over the almanac, a wave of sound, luminescent as the sea? And what if I could transform, no longer criticized for how high I fly or the topography of my wings? I'd be a proud bird brain with a bird's eye. No one could contain me. In a little crimson dress of an Electus parrot, let me touch down on the coastline of Tahiti. Ignore the peacocks with their train rattle plumes. Elevate her story with a scream. I rise above the aviary, the alpha, the heart-battered me. Move 13 ways into plural new universes to soar above the blue, wingspanned to vault beyond the trees. Thank you.
That is the way to end a reading. To soar above the trees. And poet of truth and reconciliation. I think that is the undercurrent of like every single one of your poems I've ever heard. And I remember listening to them the very first time I can place myself in the room, and to say I am grateful for your poems is a profound, profound understatement. It's a profound understatement. And yeah, what a reading. What a reading. Thank you, Susan. And I am going to fly over to you very shortly in a few days. So I hope we'll get to see each other. We'll try to make it happen. Everybody, again, I tried to prepare everyone for this reading, and I wasn't even able to prepare myself. That's the truth of that matter. That's the truth of that matter. I love it when a reading exceeds my absolutely ridiculous expectations. Yeah. So before I make a few final remarks today, folks, would you please unmute so we can thank profoundly Morag Anderson, Isabela, Basombrio, Hoban, January Gill O'Neill, and Susan Rich for this just absolutely prismatic, consequential, necessary, ecstatic day of poetry.
Con mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto. That's right.
Bravo, bravo, bravo.
So powerful.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic.
Excellent performances.
Táirtí go hálinn agus go raibh maith agat. That means it was beautiful and thank you.
Oh, Eleanor, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're looking
Fantastic.
gorgeous.
Folks, we truly had I see who was in the room. We had an amazing, amazing international audience today. I'm not going to do the math, but just, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out for this reading today. And of course, I hope you will join us next week. It's our wild card open mic to close out our offerings for the month of October. But please, everyone, look ahead to next month, and I'm going to give you the preview of next month's new book showcase. We will be graced by the presence of 4 poets who I, again, am looking forward to this constellation. Oh my gosh, they just keep coming and coming and coming. Kara Briggs, who I believe is in the room with her debut collection, Rivers in My Veins, will be with us. Phil Lynch will be with us from Ireland. Janet McFadden, who I've been reading with over the summer, to just some really amazing experiences. And for a debut reading on Cultivating Voices, and if you don't know the poetry of Joshua November will be with us. It's our November poetry showcase. So join all 4 of us then. Mark that on your calendar. I believe it's November 10th. And, you know, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but I think it's November 10th. Put that down and join us here. And of course, join us back next week, next Sunday, for Cultivating Voices live poetry. It's our wild card open mic. You all are the featured readers. Well, that's it for today. I have chills. I have chills as I'm about to close the reading, which usually I have chills when I'm opening it, but I now have chills closing it. Thank you again. Thank you again to Morag, Isabela, January, and Susan for just really showing us why poetry matters and you know why a life of poetry you know, just holds so much, can hold so many things at the same time. And in that, connect us deeper and deeper to humanity and to each other. Well, again, I'll see you next week. And as I always say at the end of the program, please, everyone, please, please, please take great care of yourselves and take exquisite care of your beloveds, whether that's virtual beloveds or beloveds from distances or those that are sitting right next to you. Just take very, very good care of your beloveds. And of course, keep writing your miraculous poems. I'm Sandy Yannone for Cultivating Voices Live Poetry, with the greatest of thanks to Don Krieger and Kim Ports Parsons. And I'll see you next week. Be well, everyone.